So thank you everyone for coming today. My name is Brandon Grant. I'm the marketing director here at QuoteWerks. And today we're going to be doing a build release webinar. So all the new features that have come out in 5.3, we're going to cover the major ones, and then we'll cover some of the smaller ones as well. But obviously the website is the best place to go. It's the best resource you have for all the information on all the new features that we release. We are going to be recording this webinar, so if you have to leave early or if you have someone from your team come in late and they're going to miss something, don't worry, we'll be recording this once we've completed it today. Usually takes a couple days, but we'll upload it to the website and we'll send out an email blast to everyone letting you know that the webinar is available to view at your convenience. So let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, we're going to do just kind of a quick PowerPoint, just a few slides to kind of get into some of the features, and then we'll actually do a demonstration of the features so you can see how those work. We'll then take questions at the end. They can be related to the new features specifically, or if you do just have some general QuoteWerks questions, I'll kind of hang around and see how many of those I can get through before we have to close the session today. So in summary, version 5.3, we did release over 58 new features. It has 31 fixes and about 8 miscellaneous features, some just kind of smaller features that we added in there as well. So in total, you're looking at almost 65, 70 features in this build release alone. So one of the major releases, or one of the major features about this release, is going to be the updates for our CRM and PSA systems that we integrate with. So we're continuing, obviously, to integrate with those. So the ConnectWise users 2018.1 and 2017.6 are supported fully in 5.3. So if you're running ConnectWise, you'll want to make sure you're on the latest of QuoteWerks. For Autotask users, we added the ability to use the master login for an API user. What that means is you can basically create a separate user for API, for the API to integrate with QuoteWerks. Basically makes it almost like a unified login, and it doesn't create a new user in Autotask, doesn't use a license on when you do that. So it's a nice little feature, so you can just have that kind of one login for everyone to use that API functionality, so you don't run into the issues of like security settings and things like that when you're trying to create like opportunities. So the instruction on how to do that is actually in the help file. So if you do want some help setting that up, just check the help file, or as always, feel free to contact our support team. For those of you that are using Act version 20 is fully supported in this release. Same thing with Sage 50 2018.1. So if you're using Sage 50 2018.1, that's going to be fully supported in version 5.3, as well as the Sugar users. 7.1 is now supported as well. All right, so as we go through, if you do have questions about any of the features, you'll see in the Go to Webinar option box, there is an option that says ask question or post question or something like that. Go ahead and post your question there. If I don't respond to your question right away, I will try to circle back at the end and answer as many of those as I can. So the first feature that we're going to talk about today is simple labor. And simple labor is exactly what it sounds like. It's going to be where you can assign a labor charge to an item that exists in your system. The really great thing about this is that you're now able to add labor to your documents automatically instead of having to add them separately. They're also going to be linked by the quantities. And what this means is that if your item requires 3 hours of labor, you can set that so that if you sell 4 of the item, it automatically updates to 12 hours of labor. So I'm going to show you how to do that today, but it's a really, really great new feature so that you can start to take advantage of that. Additionally, you have the option from the labor screen to convert it to a real item. So basically, you can actually have it created in the database directly from the when you're editing the product and adding the labor. So that's a nice feature as well. And the labor will let you, the simple labor will let you use all of like the typical line attributes. You can set your pricing, your costs, the item type, if it's taxable or non-taxable, all those type of options. So we'll go through all those today. But like I said, the really nice part about it is it's going to be more automatic for you. So you're not having to do any calculations. You're not having to remember to change it. They'll actually be linked together. The next feature is going to be section headers. So section headers are going to be extremely useful to kind of organize the document. So before we have what we call heading lines, where you're probably using those to organize it, section headers kind of takes it a step further, where you can see on my screenshot here, it's going to have a kind of gray highlighted up by default when you add it. There's also going to be a subtotal. So it'll actually subtotal out anything that's underneath it in a section. This will then allow you to run separate subtotals. You can add heading lines into that section. It just provides more functionality. So you can almost create like groups within groups kind of thing. It's kind of where the idea came from, is to do that. It's also going to display differently on your layouts and Quote Valet. So you'll actually be able to display this to your customer in a different format. For those of you that are using Quote Valet, this will automatically show up in Quote Valet if you haven't made too many changes to your Quote Valet layouts. If you've made a bunch of changes to your Quote Valet layouts and there's some coding that you just need to contact support for, and they can get you the information you need to add so that the section headers will start to appear. But for a lot of you, once you update to 5.3, if you're using our default templates in Quote Valet, those will automatically support the section headers, and you'll just be able to start using them without having to make any changes. In 5.3, we did release some new layouts that will take advantage of this feature. So you'll be able to use these on your PDF layout documents as well. If not, it's very similar to where you add like a heading line, where you can add a different type of filter to print and look specifically for those section headers. So for that, you'll want to contact support for the instructions on that. But if you go to the website, you can actually download the new layouts. When you install version 5.3, QuoteWerks will prompt you if you want to install the sample data. If you go ahead and click yes, that will actually install the new updates for you with the new layouts. So you do have a copy of those already. So we try to include them automatically for you, but if you choose not to install the sample data, then you won't get it. So you'll have to just go to the website or contact support for them. All right, so the next one is the line item quantity linking. And line item quantity linking is very similar to simple labor, where basically you create these parent and child or children items that are associated with it. So if you change item A, item B's quantity automatically changes. Basically, it keeps a ratio of those items. The really nice thing about this is essentially how simple labor works, but this is if you're kind of creating it on the fly. So we'll walk through and I'll show you the differences today, because it's a little difficult to understand when you're just kind of showing screenshots and talking about it. But when I actually go through and show you why and how it works, you'll understand. But it's going to be really useful in that you're able to link these items together. So if one item, when you sell one item, it always has to automatically have 3 of this other item. They'll always be linked together. So if you sell 4 of item A, again, we'll always sell 12 of item B. So again, we'll walk through that, and then I'll show you how that works today. All right, summary lines. So we added some new functionality for summary lines, specifically to take advantage of these section headers. So if you're just joining us, because I do see there's a few people that just kind of logged in, the section headers are basically kind of a souped up version of the heading lines, where it provides a subtotal. It's going to be a different section on the document. It just kind of makes organizing the document even easier. The section headers, or the summary lines, using the section header option here at the bottom, this is where it makes it very easy to kind of calculate a subtotal inside that section header. So for instance, if you have 5 items in your section header and 3 of them are recurring monthly, and you want to run a subtotal on those 3 items recurring monthly under that section, now you can do that very easily. Before, it was a little more complicated. You'd have to filter kind of by like item type, and you might even have to set different item types or figure something out. Now you can easily run a new summary line and utilize these section headers. So again, when we demonstrate this, a lot of these will make more sense, but that's essentially one of the big advantages of the new functionality of the summary lines, is you're going to be able to total up different recurring revenue options in your section headers more easily than you would have in the past. Dynamic notes. A lot of you, if you've updated to version 5.3, may have noticed that on the Notes tab, you have a brand new Notes field. So you'll actually see there is a large Notes field all the way on the right-hand side called Dynamic Notes. The Dynamic Notes field is really easy to use, but it's a super useful feature where you can click on the little icon in the top right, and that will automatically insert a time and date stamp onto your note field. So it'll put the user, time and date, and then you can start typing the notes underneath it, so everyone knows who left those notes what time, when, all that information is available. So I know a lot of companies have to manually put this data in. They have to remember to put their username in, even if the time and date of it. Now we're going to do that automatically for you in that dynamic notes field. The other fields, if you double click into the field or click on the little Zoom window icon, that will open up the Zoom windows, and there's the same option available for you, but you do have to click on that icon first. So the dynamic notes is used exactly for this, for like collaboration, where if you're sharing a document or working on a document with other users, you can post notes about what you've changed, maybe what needs to be changed, interactions with the clients, whatever you want to put in there. But now you can just easily put that information in of your username and date and timestamp. Required and optional items in the product lookup. This is one of my favorite features just because it makes using this functionality so much easier. Before, if you wanted to add or use the required and optional items, you actually had to go under the products menu in QuoteWerks. Now you can edit a product, and when you edit a product, you can actually assign required and optional items. Required items are basically anytime you sell item A, you automatically have to assign item B. You know, maybe there's a secondary part that comes with it. There's a service that's required for it. You know, maybe it's very complicated, so you always include an installation charge. Whatever it is, now you can automatically and easily set up those required items without having to leave the product lookup screen. So when you're setting up your products, you can actually attach these. Optional items are very similar to required items. They're just optional instead of being required. So when you attach an optional item, QuoteWerks will prompt you and ask you when you're adding that item to the quote if you want to include any of the optional items on the document. The required items and optional items window has all the same functionality, so it'll have the ability to change the quantity or set the quantity, link the quantity items, set the sort order, and choose what type of line type it is. A lot of times users will use the required items to include a secondary description for the item as its own line item. So if you want to put more information, but you don't want to kind of clutter the actual line item itself, you want it to kind of go below it, that's a great way to use required items as well. So a couple different options with that, and we'll get into a little more detail here once we get into the demonstration. Static items for bundles and required items. This is going to, again, be very useful because you're not actually going to have to create the item in the product database to use them as required and static required items and bundles. On this screenshot here, if you see the kind of top right, there's a check mark that says retrieve from product database. So basically you can uncheck that, and then you can kind of have this like static item that doesn't actually exist in the database, so you don't have to create it. So just, again, makes things a little easier. Instead of having to create the items first and then build your bundles, you can actually build the bundle, and then as you need to, you can actually attach these items. So again, we'll walk through that step here in just a few minutes. So as always, we have tons of resources on the website. That's the best place to go for more information about QuoteWerks. We have email and phone support available for you, tons of videos. The help file is updated with every release, so you'll be able to go to the support area on the website. So if you actually click on support, there'll be an option that says online help or online help documentation. You can go there and get the support that you need or get the help file. We have these live and recorded webinars. We have a users forum, so definitely check that out. That's a great place to interact with other QuoteWerks users. And if any of you are looking for any kind of local help or you want some to kind of like come on site, we do have partners all over the world, so that's always a great option as well. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is just make sure you are staying in contact with us. Social media is a great place to get updates on kind of what's new. So Facebook, Twitter, YouTube for new videos, LinkedIn. Also, we are holding our first ever QuoteWerks User Summit here coming up very soon, just a little over a month and a half away, like a month, 3 weeks. So if you're not registered, we only have about 25, actually I think we're down to 20 seats now as of yesterday. Before I updated this slide. So I think we're down to about 20 spots left for our QuoteWerks User Summit. So if you are interested in coming to the User Summit, it's going to be about a day and a half of training and just interaction with a lot of other QuoteWerks users and obviously the QuoteWerks team. So if you have questions or you're interested in that, definitely send over an email over to sales or just call them to the sales side and they can fill you in with any information or any questions that you might have. Okay, So let's go ahead and get started here. So let me just get logged in. So the first thing we're going to discuss today is going to be simple labor. That's kind of one of the major features of this release. This is one of the ones features that's been asked for a very long time. So I think we did a really good job of implementing this and making it really usable feature for a lot of people. So this is how you're going to use the simple labor. Basically, when you set up or you have items in the database, and we're just going to select this random item here. And if you edit an item in your product list, you're going to see there's a new tab. So I'll just click on the simple labor tab. And on the simple labor tab, we're going to have some options that we're going to go through. So the first one is going to be the quantity. So the quantity is going to be very important because this is essentially where you're setting the ratio. And what I mean by that is that anytime I sell one of this item, whatever I put here is going to be the quantity of the item. So if I put anytime we sell this item, we need to sell 3 hours of labor, then I'll want to set my quantity of 3. If it's only 2 hours of labor, then I would set it as 2. If it's 6 hours of labor, then I would set it as 6. So whatever the quantity, whenever you sell of the ratio of this one item to however many hours of labor, that's what's going to be set as a quantity. So for our example, I'll go ahead and I'll say 3. You can then put in a description because this is going to show up as a line item on the quote. So I'm going to go ahead and say, we'll say installation charge. And then I can put in a cost if I have it. So it costs me, $100. I have to pay one of my service reps or techs $100 an hour. And then I can put in the price. So it's going to be $300 for the price. If it has its own part number, you can add a manufacturer part number here. So if I want to call it, like labor, or here we'll say install charge 3. If there's an item type associated with it, you can assign the item type. Item type is going to be really important for the ConnectWise and AutoTask users. For the rest of you, if you're not using ConnectWise or AutoTask, you don't necessarily need to worry too much about the item types unless you're running some type of reporting on this. So you can leave it blank if you want to. But if you're using ConnectWise or AutoTask, you definitely want to set the item type. Tax code, you can set whether it's taxable or non-taxable. So for a lot of you, this is going to be a service. Doesn't necessarily have to be a service, but if it is, at least in the US, a lot of times services are non-taxable. So I'm going to go ahead and set mine as taxable. And then one of the really nice features here is the line attributes of exclude line, hide price, print line, option selected, and hide quantity. So if you don't want this item to appear on the document, maybe you're just going to give the customer like a subtotal saying, hey, for room 1 is this much, and room 2 is this much, room 3 is this much. You can choose not to have the line print. You can choose not to have the price shown, if you're going to be grouping things together. So it gives you a lot of flexibility having the line attributes available. And these are just the default. So if you need to change it on a document by document basis, you can, but these are just going to be the default settings here. And then you'll see there's an option to convert. And this will actually create a new item from all the information we put in here. So I'm going to come back to that in just a second. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. I see a bunch of questions pouring in. So I'm going to try to cover those kind of through the normal process here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. So now if I select my item here, so this is the item here that I selected, and I choose add item to quote, it's going to add a second line item, that install charge. And we'll just say we don't want to save it right there. So what you see here is my item that I added and then my installation charge. And you'll also see the quantities are now highlighted in different colors. So anytime you get this kind of like purplish color, that is going to tell you that is essentially the parent item, which we're going to get to in just a minute, and that this yellow item is the child item, or if you have multiple of them, the children item. So if the customer comes back to me and says, okay, well, actually I need 3 of these, instead of me having to change the 3 there and then change it here, as soon as I tab out, it'll automatically update. Now I see a couple of people asking when I set the price, is it the price per hour? Yes, it's essentially the unit price. So if we change this one back to 1, we set it at $300 an hour. So it's the 300 times the quantity, which is going to be the extended price. So that's what you're charging essentially, almost the hourly price. Is the easiest way to think about that when you're setting the unit price. So, but this is where you're going to save a lot of time, is that I can simply change any of the quantities of these items, and my labor charge or my installation charge or your service charge or whatever you're going to use this for. It doesn't necessarily have to be for labor. If you just need these items linked together, when I change it, it's automatically going to change it, and it's automatically going to keep that ratio. So in this case, I sent it to a 1-to-3 ratio, but if I send it to, every one item I sell, it needs 4 hours or 5 hours, you can change that. Okay, so that's the first part of the feature. Very, very easy to use. The second part about it is going to be, if you have this simple labor and you actually want to create it as a separate item, for reporting purposes, it's a lot easier to run reports on items that are in a database rather than items that are in a quote. So if you are going to be doing any type of reporting on your labor charges, what you may want to do is actually create these labor charges in your database so that you have them available as separate items. They'll still be linked together. So when I quote this item, it'll still be included automatically, but it'll be its own actual item in QuoteWerks. And the way we do that is simply click on Convert. And you'll see here this new window up at the top. It actually says new product. And then it uses the part number from the first item and then just automatically does an underscore labor. So if you want to adjust the manufacturer part number at this point, you can. Just because this is a new item in QuoteWerks, it does have to have a unique part number. It has to have a unique identifier, so just keep that in mind. And then you can see it actually carried over everything I had set. So it has my description. If I had set an item type, that would have carried over. My line attributes, if I had changed any of those would have carried over. When I go to pricing, it'll have my pricing set here. So it's going to carry over all those. But what this does is it gives you some more flexibility. So if there's more information you want to include about this particular labor item, the simple labor is designed to be just that, simple. Just quantity, description, cost, price, and some line attributes. So it's very easy to use. If you need a little more complex or just more information, that's when you would want to convert the item, or if you're going to, like I said, if you're going to be doing any type of in-depth reporting in QuoteWerks, might be a good idea to have that item created as well. So if you just kind of need a simple labor charge, this is the best way to do it. If you actually need the item in the database so you can have these additional fields, or maybe your pricing is a little more complicated, so you want to take advantage of our pricing tab, then you can go ahead and create that item as a new item in QuoteWerks. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of there and just hit OK. And we're going to go into section headers. So section headers are going to be available here on your document items screen. So my document items, we talked about this earlier, where we have heading lines. So you have a heading line. This is how you can kind of organize your document. Well, there's going to be a new option that says insert section header. And the way section headers are going to be different is when I put in a new section. So if I say this is our, we'll just say these are our products for now. It's a very simple one. The first thing you'll notice is it's going to be highlighted in gray. So it's going to be very visually definitive of where this particular section is. You'll also notice the extended price. There's an extended price here. So it actually has the total or the subtotal of these two items below it. Whereas if I had added just a heading line, the heading lines are just text. So they're a great way to organize your document, but the section headers are going to provide a little more flexibility, specifically with being able to kind of subtotal out these different groups. The other great thing about section headers is we're going to go into the summary lines, but you're also able to kind of show this information on the to the customer on your layout. So if you wanted to get pretty creative with the output for your documents, you're going to absolutely be able to do that, where you can show the customer, hey, here's the subtotal for section 1 and section 2 and section 3, without having to do a lot of complicated formulas like you had to before, because now these line types exist in QuoteWerks. In the help file, we do talk about the section header number. So like basically every line type in QuoteWerks has a specific line number associated with it. So that is in the help file. It's in the appendix, I believe, near the end of the document. But if you just have a question, go to support. But one of the nice things about the section headers is the ability to kind of break this out for your customer. So if we add a customer to our quote real quick, and then we select a layout. This is one of the newer layouts that comes with QuoteWerks, so it's built to use these section headers, and you can kind of get a feel for it. So this one organizes it by having kind of the section headers highlighted in blue. So it's actually going to show you that this is subtotal and it's bolded. So when you have multiple section headers, so here if we just add a couple other items, so let's just go ahead and add these. And then we'll add a section header too. When you preview that, you'll be able to see the definitive list. So again, it's going to help you organize it, but again, you can also kind of break it out for the customer so that when they're looking at the document, it's very apparent to them what they're purchasing, which each option is. And it doesn't have to just appear on this main screen that I have here. You could put it on like a cover page, or if you wanted to do like a summary page at the end of the quote, you could have the subtotals there and saying, hey, you know, your section 1 or room 1 or products or hardware or whatever it is going to be, this is that total and your services are this much. So you're going to have a lot of flexibility with how you want that displayed. But to kind of get started with using this, definitely I would recommend looking at the layouts that came with version 5.3. Again, if you don't have those, then just go to the website. They're available on the website for you to download. Okay, so other option I wanted to mention was if this is going to be uploaded to Quote Valet, same kind of thing. We're going to upload it to Quote Valet, and this can be displayed in Quote Valet as well. And so if we scroll down here, once we've uploaded our quote to Quote Valet, we can scroll down. And again, this is kind of the default settings we have for it. So if you're using Quote Valet, you'll automatically have access to these section headers. If you've made a lot of changes to your Quote Valet templates, then you may need to add some code into your templates, some HTML code into your templates so that they will appear. But so just you can quickly test by just creating a test quote, adding a section header, and then upload it to Quote Valet and see if it appears. If not, like I said, just contact support. They have the code that you can kind of drop in. We have some instructions for you. It's not too complicated, so you can quickly kind of add it in. But if you're already using Quote Valet and you haven't made too many modifications to your templates, then it'll just appear. And again, it kind of break things out. And the really nice thing about this is it kind of starts to let you run like groups. You can start to run bundles inside of the section headers. You can subtotal out different areas. It's going to provide a lot of flexibility for you, kind of adding this information into the document. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the line item quantity linking, because we kind of already touched on this with the simple labor. So when you are using simple labor or using the labor functionality, like I said, it's essentially creating what we call a parent item and a child item. So the parent item is going to be in purple, child item is going to be in yellow. You can actually have multiple parents and multiple child and children on the same quote. You can even get more complicated and have a parent item that's also a child item. So you know, it provides a lot of flexibility in that regard. But at its simplest, if you need to associate essentially two items together, that is this new icon on the grid toolbar here, and you can see it says set dependent quantities. And what that means is that whichever item I select second, so if I select this item first and this item second, this second item here is going to be dependent on this first item. So when I go to set dependent quantity, I'm going to put in the relative quantity, or the way I like to think about it is the ratio. So I'm going to do a 1:3 ratio. So that will leave this quantity at 1, and this one will change to 3. If I change this to 5, it'll set the child or the children item, if I'd selected more than 1, to 5. The way we decide which item is a parent and which item is a child is going to be very simple. The first item you select, the first item that you highlight, is going to be set as the parent. So if I hit OK here, you can see I've now set that item as the parent, and this item is the child. Now, the items don't have to be contiguous to be parent and child items. I could highlight this item, and then this item, and then this item, and then set a dependent quantity with those, and it would set that as a parent, that as a child, that as a child. So they don't necessarily have to be in any order. If you want to drag and drop the items into the different sections and kind of move them around, you know, maybe this is all your services down here, so you can move all your parent items to one, which are going to be your products. You can move them around. They don't lose the ratio. So as you change them, they'll actually update. Now, one thing that can be confusing when you're moving these around is because of this, you may not know which item is associated with which child item. So If you highlight a parent item and click on the drop down, you'll see it says highlight dependent quantity children. It'll basically highlight for you which item is a child or children of that particular parent item. So it makes it very easy to see that. And again, if you highlight a child item, we can go in the other direction as well, where you select the other option and you choose highlight dependent quantity parent, and it'll highlight the parent for you. As I said, any item can have a single or multiple children item. A child item could also be a parent item as well. So it could be a child and a parent, which gets into a little more confusion. But basically, if I highlight another item, you can see there's going to be an option that says set dependent quantity. And if I set it, it's going to essentially multiply everything by 5. So you can see this item is now multiplied to 75. And I'm not sure what color this shows up on your screen. Shows up just almost like a lighter shade of purple on mine. But now this item has a different color. So I know it's getting into a little more complex for most of you. You'll probably just use the kind of going back and forth between the child and parent item. But that's the easiest way to kind of think about it, is that whichever item you select first is going to be the parent, and then any items you select after it are going to automatically become the children. You can break them if you go in here, and if I change this quantity manually, it's going to say, hey, you're going to override this value. Do you want to do that? And if I say yes, and I do that, you can see it's no longer yellow because it's no longer a child item. So once you change the quantity of a child item manually, it's automatically going to essentially break from the parent item. If you go up to the parent item, eventually it'll click over and let you know that, hey, it doesn't have any children items associated with it. So just something to keep in mind. Basically, if it's yellow, it's a child, so you'll want to adjust one of the purple or the parent items ahead of time. All right. Okay, so now let's talk about our summary lines. So the summary lines are, if you right-click, you'll see there's an option that says Add Summary Line. So the first iteration of the summary line basically allowed you to run a subtotal off specific items, typically like filtering by item type. There's a couple other options as well, but that's usually what most companies use it for, is summarizing multiple items on the document by item type. So if I wanted to say, hey, how much are my services? I could see that, and I could run a quick subtotal so I could show that to my customer. Well, with the update to the summary line, you can now do it based on a section header. And the section header provides a little more information, because first you can specify, well, which section header. In this case, I have two. I have my product section header, my section header 2. And then if I choose products, I can choose if it's off the extended price, the extended list, recurring revenue, whether it's weekly, monthly, quarterly, or annual. So I can actually choose, and if they include the tax or not include the tax. So I can actually run a subtotal on just the recurring revenue monthly under my specific section header. I don't have any recurring items on my document right now, so nothing's going to show up. But if I did, then it would actually show me a new subtotal line. So in this case, we just do, we'll do extended price just so we have something show up. And I can say, okay, essentially just subtotal up my section header, and then you can see that. One of the nice things about the section headers, or the summary lines rather, is that the summary lines, again, very similar to your, they can be moved around without any issues. So you can move it around and it doesn't alter the price. Where like if you run a subtotal line in QuoteWerks, wherever that subtotal line is, it's only subtotaling up everything above it, where a summary line can actually be moved throughout the document, and the value of that summary line is not going to change because it's a calculation. It's calculating specific fields in the document. So this is something, again, that can be displayed on the document for the customer. It can be used internally, just internally as well. So it's up to you. Again, with just like our other lines, if you want to type in custom text, you can absolutely do that. You can change the text in here. There is actually a shortcut here for the line properties. If you want to change like the description, you can do that. If you click on totaling, that's actually an easy way to change it as well. So you can put in your own description there for the document, or for the line item in the document. So it's an easy way to make changes and to run subtotal lines in different sections. That's going to be the main update to this feature, is the ability to run a summary on that recurring revenue, whether it's weekly, monthly, quarterly, or annual, for a particular section, so you can kind of break it out. So if you're selling, Maybe you're doing something by rooms or locations. You can say, hey, location 1 is going to have an annual charge of, $650, and it's going to have the one-time charge of, $1,000, whatever it is. You can easily break those charges out. So just, again, we're just trying to provide a little more flexibility in how you kind of break things out for your customers and your clients. All right, and then, so kind of building on the specific items here, some of the newer features, specifically the product window, we were talking about the simple labor. There's also a couple other new tabs for your products as well. So if we go back to this item, let's go ahead and edit it again. So we talked about the simple labor. There's also the required items and the optional items tab. So the required items tab basically means anytime I quote this particular item, so this, I think it's like a switch or something, whatever it is, anytime I quote this item, anything that I attach here as a required item will automatically be pulled into the quote. Now, you may ask, well, what's the difference between that and simple labor? Simple labor is linked by quantity. So basically, if I choose, in this case, I have a quantity set of 3 for my labor charge. When I quote out 1 of these or 4 of these or whatever, it's always going to charge the appropriate amount of labor. Where required items is going to be set just essentially a static required item, saying, hey, maybe there's just a cable that comes with this that we need to purchase or that we need to sell, or some type of stand or whatever it is, some type of mount. We can include that here. And you have a couple different options where you can add an existing item. So right here it says add an existing item, and it'll actually open up your product lookup window, and you can choose a different item to include. You also have the option to create a new item from here. So if you want to create a brand new item, so if I cancel out of here and I choose create new item, you'll see here it'll actually let me create that item. So I can create an item from scratch if I want to. So that's going to be the main thing about required items, is you have the option to do those static items. You have the option to actually create the item in the database that you can quote separately if you want, or it can be a required item for something else. The optional items are a little different, where optional items allow you to include items that may not always be sold with this particular item. So if you have item A, maybe items B and C are optional. Sometimes you sell them with them, sometimes you don't. So what it does is it gives the user the option to include them or not, and it actually will have a checkbox when you go to include them, and you get to choose whether or not you want to include it in the quote or not. Each time you quote it out. So just, again, provide some flexibility. This isn't actually new functionality. Required and optional items have always existed in QuoteWerks, just the tabs on your edit product window are new. Before, you had to go under products window in QuoteWerks and then click on required items or optional items to use this functionality. So it's just in a little bit more, it's in a better place, a little more efficient for where it is, and a little easier to use. The one thing we did add was the ability to essentially create the item from here, where before all the items already had to exist. So again, we're just trying to streamline that process, make it a little easier and a little more functional to use required and optional items, because they are very useful features in QuoteWerks. Okay, so let's go ahead and back out of here. And then kind of on the same note, static items for bundles and configurations. So if you have a bundle in QuoteWerks and you wanted to add an item, before you actually had to click add item. And this will actually let you select an item that currently exists. There's not a way to add an item that doesn't exist. You actually had to already have that in the database. So that's actually where this new line comes from, where you can actually create kind of an item on the fly. And so here you can see, you can put in a part number, description, select the line type, line attributes. One of the really nice things about this is a great way to choose if an item is going to be like a comment or a subtotal. So if you wanted to build in like a subtotal in your bundles or a comment, you can easily do this, because before you actually had to go into the product database, add an item, put in the description, and then come back to your bundle and then add it as a comment separately. So it's just another step. So again, we're just trying to make it a little easier to use bundles, to really customize bundles, so that you can put subtotals in your bundles, where you can have comments about specific line items and why things are where they are in the bundle. So it just provides that kind of flexibility. You can even have headings in your bundles and take advantage of all the line attributes. So That's going to be the functionality from those static items. If you've looked at any of the emails that we've sent out last couple of weeks about version 5.3, or if you've gone to the website and you see that static items for bundles, this is what we're talking about, is being able to add items that don't currently exist in a product database and attach them to a bundle in QuoteWerks. All right. Okay, so let's go into the dynamic notes. Dynamic notes is going to be located on your notes tab in QuoteWerks. This is a very, very easy feature to use. Kind of similar to a lot of the features I've shown you today. There's no setup involved for it. But all you have to do is, when you want to enter in a dynamic note, is click on this icon in the top right, and you can see it says insert user / timestamp text. When I do that, it's going to put my QuoteWerks username, date, and the time. And then I can put in whatever note I would like to. So if I want to put in, this note is for the webinar, and then I can hit OK. And then I can go on to whatever I was doing before. If someone else comes and opens up this quote and they want to put a note in, they can do the same thing. Insert a note. It'll automatically put their note at the top. So it's going to be essentially chronologically from the top will be the newest, bottom will be the oldest. And they could put in their own notes into the dynamic notes field. You'll notice the introduction, closing, and purchasing and internal notes, they don't have that option. But if you do click on the zoom button, you'll see that that option is in there, and you also get a couple other options like copy and paste and spell check and things like that. So if you are going to use that functionality in QuoteWorks, you can actually insert the date and timestamp for on the other notes field as well. You just have to go in there because these fields serve kind of a different purpose. Specifically, the introduction and closing notes are typically notes that the client is going to see, the customer is going to see, where your dynamic notes is really designed for internal use only. But a lot of companies use all 4 fields already, so we didn't want to just kind of take over fields so you lost the note field. So instead, we went ahead and just added one. So the dynamic notes field, again, it's going to be really useful. There's nothing to set up, just allows you to go in there and insert a date and timestamp. No, there's not a way to, because I'm sure this is going to be the first question if it hasn't already been asked. There's not a way to like lock the notes down. It's not meant to be that. It's just meant to be kind of like almost like a scratch pad, like just leave notes for each other, kind of on the honor system with that stuff. But we just make it easier for you to put that username and the time and date stamp in there. So that's what it's designed for, and that's kind of how we use it as well here. So those are kind of the main features in version 5.3 that we've released. Some of the other features we want to get into, just a couple smaller ones that have had a lot of requests for, specifically in the QuoteWerks dashboard. So if you click on the dashboard icon in your system, you'll see there's an option, or there's a tab that says opportunities next to my summary. So if I click on opportunities, the biggest one was adding the ability to show multiple users. So if you wanted to show like the group all or multiple users, you can do that. So you can actually filter on not just a single user, but you can filter on a group, or there's an option for all. So that's available in the opportunities dashboard. That's one of the biggest ones. Same thing in the open window. You can actually filter on specific groups now for your prepared by. You can actually filter by various groups, and as well as the sales rep, excuse me, by groups as well. So you have the option to quickly and easily kind of filter for specific groups documents. So opportunities and open window, that's going to be the major ones there. And then the last one I wanted to mention was another one that we get a lot, is we've added a couple new options under your customized columns. So if you click on view and then customize columns, you're going to see there's a few new buttons here. The move to top and move to bottom are new. So we've never had those before. So you can basically highlight a field and move it all the way to the top or all the way to the bottom instead of having to drag it or just click the move up, move up, move up a bunch of times. The other one that's going to be new is the profit margin column. So we've always had a profit amount column that always showed you the total value of or the total profit for that particular line item. But we never showed you the profit margin per line item unless you highlighted it. We always had it here up top, but we'd gotten a lot of requests for being able to show that or being able to see that. So there is a column for profit margin. I have to find mine. I'm not sure. I've moved mine around, but it is in there. So that's an easy one to add and to show. And again, just like any of the other columns in QuoteWerks, you can choose whether or not you want that to appear on your quotes, or if that's just going to be an internal field. But it's available now, so you're not having to do any like calculations on your layout if you do want to display it. So useful if you have any like sales documents or anything like that, or if you just need to see what your profit margin is per line item that is in there. Just a reminder, these are all features in version 5.3 that I've shown today. So if you don't see something, you don't have something, just make sure you are on the very latest of version 5.3, and you'll be able to see that functionality. Okay, so we have quite a few questions that have come in. I'm going to circle back to the questions, kind of start at the top and work my way down. So if you asked a question at the very beginning of the webinar, I'm going to circle back to that. If you don't have any questions, if answered everything completely, thank you for attending. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now. For those of you that did post a question, or you have questions, or if you just want to hear the questions, just hang out for the next few minutes and I'll get through as many as I can. So again, thank you everybody for your time. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.